Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's FS Club webinar. Our talk today is going to be about, does the UK stand to retain its fintech crown after Brexit and COVID-19? I think it's without doubt that the UK was certainly holding the European fintech crown, but we've got today with us Charlotte Crosswell, who is really probably the best person to answer the question, as very much head of what's going on here in the UK. You'll know me, I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Zien, and it's my privilege to be able to introduce many of these webinars, and I'm only able to do so because of the tolerance, forbearance, and wide interests of our sponsors. Our sponsors span areas of technology, economics, and finance. And today, of course, is perfect because it brings together both tech and finance in that horrible portmanteau, fintech. I've often contended that fintech was a government-created word to try and claim that it had created the Old Street cluster. And I also, from time to time, get a little bit annoyed because I came into the city in 1984 to put computers into finance. And to have people wake up and say, wow, that's really fascinating a few years ago, still annoys me a bit. But Charlotte has risen to the challenge, and she has done a magnificent job really putting UK FinTech on the map. And she's constantly been in the press, one of the top 100 women in finance for many years. But you can read her biography online. In fact, you read it when you signed up for this. So my job is to get out of your way and let Charlotte talk. She's going to show a little video in a moment. And then we've got quite a bit of time for questions and answers and comments and observations. We'd really like to hear from you. One of the things I would just like to point out is during the Q&A, please use the GoToWebinar chat facility. Don't email me because I'm online here with you and I'll only get it afterwards. So do send the questions through and I'll feed them into a conversation with Charlotte. We're going to play a short video right now and then over to Charlotte.
The era of greed and irresponsibility on Wall Street has led us to a perilous moment.
I think the disbelief of what was happening in front of people made them question, I thought I trusted my bank, and now I'm not so sure.
We needed an event such as that to really be the first catalyst.
And that's when we started to see the advent of the fintech community and the ecosystem grow rapidly.
Consumers are going to hold the power, and the company that can solve the most consumer problems the best way is the one that is going to win.
The real challengers are not other fintechs, but the tech fins, because they have access to the data.
They basically have gathered every aspect of your life. We're already at a point where there's too much information given away.
With the recent events, people start caring about their data. There is a bit of mistrust in the ability of different organizations to handle this data.
90% of capital goes to white male founders. It's unacceptable.
Less than, I believe, 14% of leadership roles, decision-making roles at venture capital firms are held by women.
We need people to be in the room building the algorithms of the future.
Es ist ernst. Nehmen Sie es auch ernst.
You must stay at home.
Everything has changed about the way we work, the way we live, the way we shop, and technology's been right at the forefront of that.
It's estimated 6 million adults downloaded a banking app for the first time during the crisis. That's 12% of the UK working adults.
The new normal, isn't going to be the old normal, but with face masks on.
Great. Well, welcome back. And Charlotte, we'll just get the slides up and get cracking. There we go.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And it's great to be with you, albeit virtually. I'm staring slightly jealously at your background there, which looks a little bit more exciting than mine. And thank you for the kind introduction and for the invitation to speak today. You have such an amazing network. We've known each other for many years, and I really admire the work you do. As you all know, you have put on some brilliant FS Club webinars this year, getting into the detail of technological innovation. The depth of fintech is plain to see. So many fantastic ideas out there. You just can't help think that disruption is well upon us. I'm not going to be going too deep into technology today, but happy to answer some questions. But I would like to give a broad look at the UK FinTech sector. I'll tell you where UK FinTech is today in my view, a review of some of its achievements to date, and where it stands in comparison to our global competitors. I then want to get into the meat of the topic. The key question, does it still stand to retain its FinTech crown post-Brexit and COVID-19? Two minor things we're tackling. I'll can tell you it's not going to be a simple yes or no answer. But the question of the future of UK FinTech is well timed. Innovate Finance has been working very hard over the last few months on the independent review of the FinTech sector for Treasury. This is chaired by Ron Khalifa, ex-CEO of WorldPay. And the review is looking at the really big drivers for FinTech success, how we can secure the next decade and more of UK FinTech growth. We've been co-secretariat with the City of London Corporation, and it's been great just to engage with so many people putting that input into Ron's review. I'm not quite sure he truly knew what he was taking on when he started it, especially during COVID years. So we definitely want to thank him for all his hard work, and we've had 250, 300 people input into that. So those recommendations are coming out in the new year, and we really hope that serious piece of work will help define how the government, regulators and industry approach the future of UK FinTech over the coming years. He's certainly been starting to socialise some of those recommendations. I must admit, it seems to capture everything we've been hearing, so that's great, and it'll be interesting to see where he comes out in his final report. Perhaps if we flick over to the next slide. Go on, I'll let you introduce the poll, Michael.
Yes, just to get things going, we'd like, because we are looking at the future of FinTech competitively in the UK, where do you think the action is going to be in the future? So if you just have a quick look at your poll there, I can see people very quick off the buzzers. We've got already 20% have voted. So Singapore, Berlin, London, Shanghai, and New York. And Charlotte, you're in my hands are tied. We're not allowed to vote. Okay, we're almost up there now, getting up to well over 3/4 have voted. Go ahead, Morgan, if you don't mind closing down that poll and sharing the results. Well, there you go. You've got a crowd of supporters behind you, Charlotte, but Singapore and Shanghai nipping at the heels, perhaps. Back to you.
Well, I was just glad you didn't put Paris up there, because it would have totally upset me if it had come out strongly. But it's quite an interesting one of how much they're throwing at the sector, but without as much success perhaps as they would like for all of their input. We'll discuss that maybe later on. So let's start with UK FinTech and the scene today. It's a good picture, as you can see. We have a thriving ecosystem of startups and scale-ups, over 3,000 FinTech companies. As you say, Michael, quite interesting what gets defined as a FinTech company, I've discovered now. What I used to think of as a finance company that's 200 years old apparently is now FinTech as well. But this is truly FinTech. Looking at the operating in a huge range of verticals, addressing a broad range of different customer segments, and a raft of business models and scaling strategies. The UK sector is ahead of other European economies on most measures. Investment into FinTech stood at $4.9 billion in 2019. It's compared to 3.6 billion in 2018. So it continues to grow, and we've seen some good signs of investment this year, despite the tough year we're all going through. So we're number one in Europe for FinTech investment, and way ahead of second place Germany, which attracted $1.3 billion in 2019, to set it into context. This year we're on track to be second in the world after the US. So a sneak preview on that. China is definitely slowing off. UK is home to 8 out of Europe's 12 FinTech unicorns, although I hear that we're about to hit 9. So watch the space on that one. They keep growing all the time with the evaluations. We have 71% of digitally active UK adults now use the services of at least one FinTech firm. It's true that we are behind the US. It's a different size market, as we know. So I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to anyone. But in Europe, we are definitely well ahead. And that positive picture for UK FinTech has become perhaps just a little bit tougher in the wake of coronavirus. So investment has lost momentum up to the end of Q3 2020, but the capital raise still is standing at $2.7 billion. So it's going to be down on last year, but I don't think that's any huge surprise. And some of the more B2C focused fintechs have taken a hit. On the flip side, the pandemic has pushed forward the rate of digital adoption among consumers and accelerated digital transformation in large institutions that I think has probably advanced us by 3 to 5 years in some cases. And the fintech lenders have played a tremendous role in supporting small businesses with disbursement of emergency loan schemes such as CBILS, bounce backs, etc. And once they got accredited, they did a great job. And I think it'll be interesting to see what role they will play into the successor loan program and into SME financing, as we do anticipate some of the banks, as they did in 2008, pulling back from that market just because of potential bad debt they're holding. Anecdotally, we know of many of our B2B members seeing their sales cycle cut as institutions look to adopt new technology at speed. So it's just, amazing positive impact. In the last couple of weeks, we've heard that Starling Bank has turned a profit for the first time, with other established fintechs saying they're either not far behind, or I did see a cheeky tweet from one saying that they could have made it profitable, but they continue to focus on growth. So we're becoming a bit competitive on the profitability side. So as we reach the end of 2020, there are reasons to be cheerful. So do we still stand to retain the crown? My answer is, and you won't be surprised here, from the first slide as well, yes, it's possible. But it's a qualified yes. It's not a given or a definitive. I absolutely accept that without coordinated support and collaboration across industry, government and regulators, there is a risk that that crown does slip away. And my message, therefore, if we were to do nothing, that crown could be snatched from the UK's head and quickly. Our European neighbours are gaining ground, and the US surges further into the horizon. They were doing that irrespective of Brexit and COVID, but with those two huge issues converging, it's plain to see that resting on our laurels isn't an option. So we need to take some action. And I want to talk today about 3 areas where we need to make those improvements and that are vital to securing the crown: investment, talent, and regulation. We'll go to the next slide. So investment, as I said just a moment ago, over the last few years, there's been a strong flow of investment capital into fintech, typically, no, not exclusively from venture capital firms. The availability of seed and Series A or B funding has not been much of an issue for UK FinTech. I'm not saying it's easy for those founders who are about to start shouting at me, but the real problem is a lack of growth capital in the UK. And we saw this in the tech days, back at the end of the 90s and the early 2000s. So in other words, a relative scarcity of the financing that enables those scaling innovative companies, both young and established, to reach maturity. We undertook some research with the Scale Up Institute earlier this year, post the initial lockdown, and looked at the growth capital gap and the difference between demand and supply of financing. That stands now at about £15 billion per year. That's across all sectors. It's not a new problem, but it's been estimated that it's been doubled, and it's estimated by Covid-19. So as I said, that's not just fintech, that's scale ups of all sectors, but even the fintech growth capital gap stands at around £2 billion a year. So that's a serious barrier to the expansion of one of the most exciting, productive and innovative sectors we've seen in the UK for some time. There's many reasons why the gap exists. I won't go into all of those today, but I would like to just come out with a couple of solutions that we found in our research across a wide range of the ecosystem in the research report. So firstly was we need to put together a national blueprint for growth that allows us to deliver a strategic joined up approach to support and champion more consistent and effective economic growth across all regions and sectors. We need to accelerate the unlocking of institutional and corporate funding through changes in legislation and organisation that crowds in this existing significant private sector capital that can make inroads into closing the growth capital gap. DC pension schemes comes up time and time again. I always find it slightly upsetting when I see overseas pension funds investing into our venture companies, but our own UK pensions can't, and therefore don't experience perhaps that growth at an early stage. We believe we need to expand and build upon the British Business Bank, strengthen their regional presence with empowered decision making deployed under a national framework, and continue the development of its products along with the Scottish Investment Bank, Development Bank of Wales, and InvestNI. On top of this, for fintech specifically, we want to look at the creation of a specific fintech fund that can target domestic capital to incentivise fintech investment. This doesn't need to be government money, but we do need to catalyse and convene the private sector's money. And delivering that capital to fintech companies that need to scale is a clear priority. It may beg the question of what we can offer to fintechs in terms of public markets once they're ready to enter them. For me, it's work I've been doing a lot of recently, is a big area of risk, is letting our homegrown tech companies slip off to IPO overseas. It's true there are certain listing rules in other markets which make them a more attractive IPO destination. And it's worrying when a UK fintech founder is debating where to list. I really hope that the UK should be a no-brainer. So to help us get there, some changes to listing rules would be welcome. I've been working with a group of investment banks, London Stock Exchange, the Number 10 business team on pushing for these changes. And we recently saw a review on listings by Lord Hill being announced. Call for evidence is until the 5th of January. If anyone wants to put into that, it's very tight. And it's tight because there is just the most amazing pipeline of tech and fintech companies who want to access public markets in the next 12 to 24 months. So it's a real welcome step forward that we've seen the start of that work. Personally, we hear strongly that we need to look at the free float requirements. That doesn't mean a race to the bottom on corporate governance, but we have to find the right level to make listings more attractive to founders. Allowing the issuance of dual class shares, or golden shares as some people call it, will give more flexibility to founders. If they don't have that flexibility and can't grow their companies on the public markets with some degree of control, then they just won't access the public markets. They will try to stay private, and there's a good chance that money is going to come from overseas private equity, which then potentially influences trade sales, overseas IPOs, etc. I think we can't really credibly say that UK fintech holds the crown if homegrown fintech companies access public markets elsewhere. So I want to see the most promising scaling companies, getting the capital they deserve and they need to achieve their potential, and perhaps reach that much sought after unicorn status. As I said, we saw this in the tech days, and I was very, like you, Mike, I've been around finance and technology for a long time, so that's why I naturally end up in fintech world. But in tech, we saw this. We didn't see that capital coming in. Bear in mind that Google, Amazon, Apple were all starting or starting to scale then. These were the days where you could get hold of Jack Ma by just simply dropping him an email. And we didn't manage to take our companies to that level and make them global. In fintech, we have that opportunity to do that. We really do. We're thought leaders here. We've got regulators and government behind it, but we have to allow this capital to come in. Let's go to the next slide on talent. So if you ask most fintech founders what the biggest headache is, they will invariably say investment capital or access to talent. The fintech sector is growing quickly, and it needs people with generalist and specialist skills to power it forward. Fintech is already a sizable employer. There are over 100,000 people working in the sector, and probably more depending which companies count as fintechs. But without that ready talent pipeline, the growth of the sector will obviously be hampered. Of those people working in the sector, 42% are from overseas, and that's 28% from the EEA. So throwing Brexit and immigration changes into the mix creates some significant complication, not for those people already here perhaps, but for that pipeline of talent we want to continue to attract to help fuel our fintech growth. So an immigration regime that is unfriendly to business by adding layers of bureaucracy and cost will hit fintech particularly hard at this moment of their growth. The gap cannot readily be filled with domestic talent yet. There are many brilliant young people leaving our schools and universities, but there is a concern that there just simply aren't the specialist skills that tech companies need so desperately, because this is a global race for talent. Everyone wants the same talent, unfortunately. So it isn't a problem particular to fintech, and I think many business leaders across a range of sectors are worried where their future talent is coming from. But if we look at fintech specifically, the problem does seem to be especially acute. Across EU countries, the battle is fierce. Berlin, Paris, Amsterdam, Lisbon, Tallinn, they're all trying to attract the best and brightest, and that's just in Europe. So the UK is at a real risk of being in a relatively hard place to hire the best talent. If we can't compete for talent, we will probably lose the fintech quite quickly. So how do we secure the talent of the future? How do we get the right mix of skills into scaling fintechs, and how do we create diverse, high-performing businesses? And they're big questions. Addressing the visas regime is an obvious place to start in the short term. Fast-growing businesses just cannot afford the time and money that is wasted with slow visa processes. So we need to find a means to fast-track those visas for overseas talent and targeted support for scale-ups in particular. I keep hearing horror stories through the review of 8 to 10 weeks to get visas through. And then I speak to other city mayors around the world who tell us proudly how they've got that down to 1 or 2 weeks. Even countries like Amsterdam putting tax incentives in for expats to move there. We have to trust our fastest growing companies that want to put well-paid jobs into the UK. They're probably not going to be bringing entry-level people in and going through the cost of that. They're bringing people in because it's talent they don't have already. And if we don't create that environment for them to bring that in, they will simply put those jobs elsewhere. So we do also need to look at how we attract more graduates and school leavers into careers in fintech. There's no traditional background for someone in fintech. People could learn an awful lot on the job. Internship opportunities aren't as commonplace as they could be. And many degrees don't even insist on students having industry experience as part of their course. So we need to change that. Looking at the younger years, Innovate Finance has actually been thinking of ways to get secondary school students to think about careers in innovation. I'd love to see this done at a government level. So one of the aims of our FinTech for Schools experience, which we literally launched in November this year, is to show how exciting it is to work in the industry and the types of new roles it offers. And people just don't know this. They don't know what they can't see. So talent is a multifaceted issue, which may take many years to resolve. But we have to start building our talent pipeline now to stop shortages in the future. We have to retrain those that are coming out of work. And let's face it, there's going to be a lot of people out of work, and put in the digital skills that they need that will in turn help us fuel our growth. And now let's move on to regulation. Next slide. So it's well and rightly acknowledged that the UK has very supportive, forward-looking innovation regulation, and it's been at the absolute cornerstone of fintech's growth in the UK. It isn't a problem in that sense, but it is an area where I fear we risk resting on our laurels. As technology ideas and business models shift, so must regulation. If we stay static, we will potentially fall behind other jurisdictions. So digital economy is obviously forging ahead at pace. The role of big data and AI is growing at lightning speed, and digital ideas being looked at more and more. They're all becoming more and more intertwined and interdependent. Innovation specific to financial services shows no signs of slowing. Crypto assets may become more mainstream, open finance is being discussed more and more, and ESG investing is moving to the top of the agenda across the world. So regulation needs to keep up to stay ahead of these trends. We need to ensure that the UK remains the most friendly environment for fintech. We need to be the most forward-thinking jurisdiction and position ourselves right in the middle of the most advanced conversations about the future of fintech regulation. And that's going to require deep dives into some of those new and growing trends I mentioned. To give a quick example, it's recognised that the UK is ahead of the EU is ahead of the UK in a much more ambitious digital idea agenda. And that's just one example where we risk losing ground. Simultaneously, we're seeing the fintech sector mature. There are now more and more scale-up companies, those of which have progressed out of startup mode and are more secure and established. They have solid revenue lines, but may not yet be profitable. It's these companies that need quite specific, quite targeted help from regulators. The FCA's regulatory sandbox, which has been copied rightly across the world, the program of targeted assistance for those newer startups, and it's received many plaudits. If imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, then seeing those spring up in the other countries show us how effective that idea was. What we would like to see, and our members really want to look at, is how do we support those scaling companies with that hand-holding from the FCA and regulators as they are growing more mature, as they start to perhaps suffer some growing pains. These companies are growing very, very fast. And they are going from very small startups to very large companies very quickly. And obviously they're facing off to consumers. So we have to ensure that we give them the guidance and support as they continue on that journey. And finally, I'd like to speak for much of the industry when I say we would like to see government departments a little more joined up in their approach to supporting the fintech sector. We talk to them all. They are all very enthusiastic on the sector. Individually, Treasury, DIT, DCMS, BEIS, as well as other bodies such as ourselves and the British Business Bank are doing great work. But in the spirit of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, greater coordination under a unified strategy would really help the sector, in my view. Let's just move on to the next slide. So looking ahead, investment capital, talented people, and supportive policies and regulation all feed into fintech growth. And they are interrelated issues, things overlapping very closely. To see the changes that we need, we will all have to collaborate. Government, industry, regulators, financial institutions, entrepreneurs, and hubs across the UK will have to work together. Global fintech is evolving fast, and the UK must work in unison to secure the sector's future. If we don't focus on these issues, or if we don't collaborate effectively, we potentially face numerous risks. We'd risk seeing far fewer unicorns and truly disruptive companies here in the UK. We potentially risk seeing the lucrative IPO market for fintech and UK fintech disappearing overseas. We risk seeing companies spending precious time searching for talent in a shrinking pool, or tied up in visa bureaucracy, or simply just putting jobs or relocating overseas. And we'd risk losing our lead in regulatory innovation, with the UK no longer recognised as the place to be for supportive regulatory environment. The risks are here. They can be minimised. I'm very excited about the review, which has really pulled together all of these thoughts and is saying exactly this, that we have to then set our strategy for the future. And therefore we can absolutely retain its crown. We should have every confidence it will. So in summary, I think there's work to be done, but I am absolutely confident that a collaborative effort will make sure that is done. Thanks, Michael.
Fantastic, Charlotte. And we had a little poll here for everybody just to sort of summarize what's going on. Kind of challenging one. You saw Dave Birch in the video saying, is it fintech or tech fin? So select which Western tech giants you think are most likely to enter regulated financial services, such as banking, insurance, and pensions. Is it Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, or Alphabet, also known as Google? Votes coming in, well over half the audience, up to 3/4 of the audience. That's superb. Okay, and we'll close it now. Fantastic. Well, it looks like Amazon is the winner. I think we're doing a lot of work with Amazon as we all sitting at home ordering frenziedly from them. Anyway, we'll just close that poll there. So it looks like Amazon is the one, and I must say there's a lot to be said for looking at it that way. That in the same way that we've seen Walmart move in. But let's turn to some of the questions that we've got out here. We've got quite a few questions. Folks, as you gathered, this Khalifa review is underway, and Charlotte is a linchpin in that review. So if you've got any comments or questions you'd like me to feed to her directly, they will get to her. All the comments and questions will get to her with your email. So don't be afraid to make suggestions. But let's get cracking here. Robin Davis has a question. I would say that they would try to enter, but whether regulators let them is probably more the question. You were praising the regulatory sandbox. I personally have had many experiences where the regulatory sandbox has been an exclusion. But Robin is asking, how you feel about that, Charlotte.
On the sandbox specifically, I missed the beginning question. Yeah. So, I think what I like to see on sandbox, if I look at what's missing, is it's not an industry sandbox. It is a regulatory sandbox, and we have seen quite a lot of demand for a sandbox that can actually help those unregulated companies test their products as well. If we think of data and IoT and what the future of some of these products are, not all of those will come into the regulated world. So I think that is the challenge. As I said, looking at something beyond the sandbox, which is, I do believe it's a great place for places to start and get that nurturing. But for someone who's set up 2 regulated companies myself in previous life, I know how difficult it is to go from that phase all the way through to being fully regulated. So the transition is just as important. We don't want to put companies off from coming into the funnel. We want them to move through the funnel as well and make sure that we still have a fairly wide pipe coming down it. So I think it's the transition as much as what we put in to start with.
It's kind of interesting. The title of this webinar, both COVID-19 and Brexit. And in a way, COVID-19 is good. But Brexit does appear to be bad, despite all the sort of freedoms we were supposed to obtain. Trevor Hilder would like you to expand on Brexit, and in particular, I'd like to add into the mix. You pointed out quite rightly the survey that was done about 18 months ago, showing that 49% of fintechs were founded by non-UK nationals. 42% of fintech workers were non-UK nationals. In your slide, you had 28% were from the EU, and therefore 14% being ex-EU. But in all of this mess, for a small company, the burdens of visas for that, if you're looking at, I was dealing with 1 out of 10 of my 10 employees. Now I'm going to 3 or 4 out of 10. That seems outrageous, and lot of lack of clarity there on what the UK government's proposals are. What are you specifically lobbying for, or is it more just it's got to be fast, simple, and visa applicant friendly?
I mean, it is the latter. I think we're not, as I said, we're not suggesting that we open the floodgates. Let's face it. A lot of people were pro-Brexit because of immigration. It drove a lot of people, against EU. But if we are creating well-paid jobs that are going to pay tax in this country and skills that we don't have, or companies that will take us from 200 people to 300 people to 5,000 people, those are the companies we want to support. And we are seeing some of these fintech unicorns, because they are regulated and therefore the compliance staff are sizable and their coding staff are sizable. I would personally like to see those jobs open in the UK. I think, one, that helps them scale, but two, it creates the ecosystem so people can learn from them as well. We see this in scaling talent. We don't have those, that Silicon Valley network of people who've done this multiple times, reinvested, done it again, and where you can spread that knowledge out. And we just don't have it. So it's not just one simple part of the visa problem, it's the whole piece of how do we fuel the most exciting technologies, and it's technologies, this isn't just fintech, for the future. I personally would like to see that embraced at the holding company, the sponsoring company, rather than down into every individual job that you have to justify your putting that in. So so Brexit is one of the main drivers, for concerns over talent. Obviously, it was a problem before. The other ones around Brexit is we have to remember that when we see the banks who've gone from MiFID 1 to MiFID 2, PSD2, through GDPR, we've gone to open banking, and they continue to just move these huge regulatory and compliance teams into the next thing. And the latest one was Brexit. Fintechs aren't like that. They've had to go and get secondary licenses. That's just added cost. And when you've just done a 10, 20 million raise, which isn't small, to then spend $1 million or $2 million on a license and putting someone into that country is a challenge. Now they can do it, but just adds cost. So I still think the UK will be incredibly attractive. While we have financial services here, there's a good chance we keep fintech here, and we have to do our best to also attract the fintechs from Europe to come and do business with our financial services ecosystem here. Because I think as long as you keep that here, you create that ecosystem. But it's not without challenges.
Yeah, if we could just pick up on that. Robin Davids has come back again with I slightly misled you on the sandbox. He's also curious about regulatory approval getting out of the sandbox. Once they get in, can they actually get out? And I might add a supplement to that. Post Brexit, are we going? It used to be great. I've got Bank of England approval. Well, that's sweet. You've got some offshore bank. Why don't you get the ECB to approve it? Is that where we're headed?
I mean, I think what we've seen in the fintech world on the licenses is literally just choosing another market. And we were in talks with some of those markets early on, 2016, 17, of how we could fast track. So if companies were FCA approved, then could they be fast tracked through that market? We saw the EU tend to close in a little bit on that. But certainly, there were some who were going down to Lithuania, Estonia to get their license. More recently, we've seen more going to Dublin and Amsterdam. Looking at that base there. But I'm hoping when we get to January 1st, we can reopen those conversations with some of those European centres and work out how we can do that. We've got to be able to at least recognise the work that's been done by FCA. It doesn't need to be approved, but if you turn up with an FCA approved company, then I'd hope that would allow you to set in some good stead. And there's some markets will be quite competitive, I think, for that around Europe. So we'll hopefully see some breakaway. Do you want me to come back on Robin's point?
Okay, yeah.
On the transitioning out. As I said, for someone who's set up, I did an exchange world, I set up 2 MTFs. It's a hard journey, but it's a hard journey for the right reason. These companies, if I challenge Nikhil Rathi, his new role of saying, can you just hurry up and let these fintechs in? They are facing off to consumers, they are facing off to businesses, and I think it's finding the right balance. But that is why I want that support on the transition. and so I transition, probably the wrong word to use with Brexit now around the corner, but the transition out of the sandbox into regulatory status.
I'd like to turn to talent, and it's interesting. You've kind of lit up the board. You're a bit of an exemplar of women in fintech, obviously being kind of top of the tree in this area. Anita Millar has a sad tale to tell. She's had her personal experience with fintech firms being dismissive of women and mature applicants. In fact, to my face, although I am childless, they said they don't hire women because they have children, and this came from a youngish man and not from a generation where this view was once prevalent. They're overlooking talent that's right in front of them. Edwina Morton adds to that kind of something. When you're now going into schools these days, do you find more girls than used to be the case interested in fintech, or do the stereotypes still hold with white 24-year-olds writing the majority of the algorithms based on their own limited experience?
On the first topic, yes. I mean, unfortunately it's sad to hear, but I'm not surprised in some cases. What we've been doing is moving our skills and talent program into actually skills, talent, and culture. And there's been something called the FinTech for All Charter that we've been working on within Chorus Group that is about that. It's finding the right culture of those companies, because if we don't get the culture right, potentially we don't tackle the talent and the diversity issue. And I mean, to the maturity gap, in some ways, I'd love that not to be true. Most companies I work with, and these are some great founders, definitely want the years of experience, if anything more than the younger people. But there is always going to be isolated cases. Unfortunately, there's definitely more isolated cases out there, I think, that we won't hear about. From our perspective, we are doing a huge amount around the diversity and inclusion agenda. We do mentoring, we do coaching, we do it even for investment firms who are interested in finding out more female founders. We bring people together. We publish the Women in FinTech Power List, as I said, and more recently we've been working on the charter, and we're also now looking at the Charter for Black representation in financial services. What my personal aim would be is that we showcase the sector, somebody who doesn't matter what background they come from, where they started off in life, what gender they are, what race they are, and that we encourage them in, because we can't afford to be that fussy. We cannot afford to miss out 50% of the population. We have to encourage this, and we need to have a can-do attitude. And there's very few women who work in a startup. We're talking about whether you have children or not, because we were all teachers for a term last term. But there's very few women who work in a startup for the money. You do it because you actually feel passionately about that product. In terms of the schools, the reason that we launched the FinTech for Schools program, it's something I feel passionately about myself personally, is we started going into sixth form colleges to talk to. In fact, I did an all-girls speech 2 years ago, so it was 2 years ago this month, and sixth form, and I said, how many people are studying maths? 50% of the audience put their hands up, which I was impressed. It's at A-level. How many people want to go into finance? 2 hands. And how many people into tech? A different 2 hands. This is not a sector, therefore, that is naturally being seen by young girls to come into it. They think finance is boring and tech's too geeky. So FinTech for Schools was born out of the back of that, was to try to inspire it. And in all our early literature, we only use women, and we only use young people. So that's where it started from, and we'll see what we can do.
Great. Bob McDowell says that the UK is good at innovation, but tends to lose interest in long-term scaling up, preferring to sell out to larger enterprises and just enjoy the fruits of it all. And he's wondering also, does collaboration require reduction in the protection of the IP of fintech companies? And another question related to this as well, do you welcome these moves to weaken the employer's ability to restrict competition if people move jobs?
Remind me of the first one. Never did have a great memory.
About the UK's lack of interest in scaling up.
Scaling, yeah. I mean,
it's all in Surrey and retire.
Yeah, I mean, I think if people sell out and then start again, we shouldn't criticize them. I think we have to be clear on that. And I've met some great founders who've been doing this multiple times. The Nordics are really good at that. They scale, they sell, and they start again, or they scale, they hand over to a CEO, and they invest into new startups. We don't have that yet. There's a few people, don't get me wrong, I've met many founders who have invested there, but we need to have more of that. So we want to make sure that if they're going to sell, they're doing it for the right reason. You talk to DeepMind and you understand why they sold to Google. That wasn't anything to do with the UK. They needed access to compute. But we have to make sure that they're not selling because it's just so hard to scale in this country that it's put them off ever doing it again, because that is going to stop them doing it in the UK. So I would love to see successful entrepreneurs, if they are going to exit, then investing and helping people through. And I was very encouraged with Brent Hoberman at First Minute Capital putting a new fund together just this week on bringing more capital into tech. We just need more of them, because that's the funds that are going to help scale our companies. In terms of protection of IP, we have to protect our IP. There are companies that do that. Obviously, they take the IP coming out of those universities, they put it into different companies to protect it. So if the company gets sold, the IP doesn't go with it. And I think that's one of the models we can certainly look at. But protection of IP, protection of jobs is really crucial.
Hugh Purser says that the fintech crown seems to be being defined as encompassing vertical integration of the whole industry. But does the UK perhaps dominate in one part of the fintech supply chain, which will engage the world regardless of what happens to the bigger fintech picture?
For me, if the fintech sector, the thought leadership and the coordination brings innovation into financial services in all parts, then I think we have won out. Now, because I think the fintechs will still continue to do well. They will come to a country where we are seeing innovation at the forefront. Our large financial institutions in the UK have done a pretty good job on innovation, because I've seen them around the world. I'm not going to talk about Asia now, but actually, if you look at banks, asset managers, insurance companies now, everybody is talking innovation. That's not necessarily replicated around the world. You're seeing it dominate from the tech side, tech into fin, but not necessarily the fin into tech. So fintechs, not only will they show the way, some of them will survive and become unicorns and the global players, and others will no doubt partner and potentially sell out to one of those large institutions. But if anyone has any doubt that transformation innovation is here to stay, I think COVID has shown that, and the growth in some of the payments, e-commerce, reg tech, incredible for us.
We've got time for just two quick questions. The first one's really related to fintech was part of the foreign direct investment streams that we used to see in the UK. As recently as 2017, the UK attracted $101 billion. But then in 2018, it was $65 billion. And last year, it was $59 billion. So an enormous drop. Sharon Leclerc-Spooner asks, you mentioned the costs of Brexit to be managed. Are there any tangible benefits for the fintech industry from Brexit?
I think, as I said, if we keep our financial services sector here, I think we will continue to, we can attract global fintechs to come here and get access to FS, more people to come over here and work here and grow from here. And we have to say there has to be that alignment. I think there is incredible interest from sovereign wealth around the world, and I talk to them all, of investing into UK FinTech. Why do they want to do that? Because they see that we have the ability to innovate and incubate. They want to have reassurance that we are able to scale. So it comes back to that scaling issue. If we can prove that, then guess what? We're going to continue to attract that investment. And the interest is there, I can absolutely assure you, because I talk to many global hubs every single week.
Okay. There are a couple of suggestions here. Tax relief for developers working in finance, VCs becoming sponsors for visas, and some other things to maybe loosen the pool. And I'll pass those on to you. But a question here really from Andrew Churchill. Do you think that the launch of the digital sandbox yesterday, broadening beyond regulation and the FCA, is this a good thing?
I mean, I love the digital sandbox. I love the ideas that are going to be generated in there. If it's successful, that's great. And I sincerely hope it's not going to just stay as a pilot, that we see that as a permanent fixture. And congrats to the corporation and the FCA for getting that launched.
And a final question to end on, really a good one, really. Keith Baer, what would be the one best outcome of the UK FinTech Strategic Review in your opinion?
A big sigh, because there's so much input. I'm trying to work out what I would like to see. I think the coordination of the strategy. We've got to coordinate this. Lots and lots of voices, and that's great. And we all have the right mindset to want to succeed. Can you imagine if we coordinate and put as much effort as when we started the sector into scaling the sector? We will continue to stay ahead. But it's now a pivotal moment for the sector, And that's the way forward, in my view.
Oh. Well, Charlotte, that was super. A real tour de force, a very fast rip through a very important, large, and hopefully growing sector, which is what we all want. And I think it's important that the initiatives that you're doing, particularly with regard, to the areas that matter, talent in particular, investment and regulation. These are the areas that we need to continue to push to develop. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Folks, please do contribute anything you'd like to the review. Because this is the time to get your word in edgewise. You really need to. Anyway, it falls to me to close, if you don't mind. And Charlotte, I'll come to you in a moment, if I may. Firstly, I'd like to thank the FS Club sponsors. As mentioned earlier, you really are a most accommodating group of people who let us range widely and freely. Secondly, thanks to you, the audience, particularly vibrant today. Really good and some good pointed remarks there that Charlotte will get. And I'd just like to say that for all of you, we've got quite a few forthcoming webinars. As ever, really visit the website. But a reminder that tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, a really interesting new concept on what's called data gravity from some of our friends at Interaction, who really manage all of the deep data centers in finance. And so they've got some really compelling statistics about where the gravity of data might be moving and what that might mean for finance in the medium term. And we'll pick up again next week also on data, which runs to Brexit again, and data localization. So there's a lot happening. Check out the website. But finally, Charlotte, I really have to thank you. Yes, we've known each other a while, and I've always enjoyed our encounters, and today is certainly no exception. And I appreciate the hard work and effort you put in. Unfortunately, as advanced as technology is getting, I am unable to open the floodgates of applause to thank you properly. And therefore, I have an artificial device. This is my Korean karmic clapper from one of my favorite temples in Bulgoksa in Korea. And I will now use it to simulate the audience. So high tech there.
I love
we
it.
hope to have you back, because when the Khalifa review's out, I think it could be a really exciting team. So perhaps pick up with you when that's finally published. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate it.